Hello. Hey, Jim McDermott here, technical agronomist in Northwest Iowa with DeKalb and Asgrow. So here with Paige Thompson-Russ, who's my counterpart as a TA in Northwest Iowa. And then, of course, the esteemed Craig Lamore, who's our tech development rep located at Storm Lake, covering Northwest Iowa. So good to have you both on.
Thanks, Jim.
We are actually recording this before Thanksgiving, so thought we'd use this as the title of Thanksgiving Thoughts. And my question I'm going to pose to you two, and we're going to answer it at the end, keep everybody in anticipation, but what is your favorite way to use your turkey leftovers after Thanksgiving? So be thinking on that one.
All right.
Well, we're going to jump right in. Talking about corn rootworm, basically what we saw in 2022. Some of the research data results, some very interesting results, especially when you start looking across the board at Northwest Iowa, Iowa State, as well as the whole state of Iowa. And then what does 2023 look like?
Yeah, so let's get right into it. As far as a recap of what we saw for corn rootworm in 2022, yes, we saw lower numbers overall in that corn on corn and the corn on beans, but there was a later hatch. With that monitoring, we do a lot of those sticky trap monitoring across the company. And, we're still finding hot spots of feeding. And the corn rootworm beetle count is high as ever. And Craig, this is a sticky trap from your farm. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yes, Paige. So this is from the corn on corn location that I had, one of the two. And this is a known high pressure area field for me. It's where I do a lot of my research and protocol work for corn rootworm. And, if you think about the threshold, depending on where you read thresholds for catching rootworm beetles on a sticky trap, it's at least 2 beetles per day per trap is a threshold. And some folks will say it's maybe closer to 5, but this one right here is closer to 20. And these are almost all Western corn rootworms. And again, this is off the chart pressure, and it does show in root feeding and yield potential.
Yeah, that's a little rough with those Westerns. I mean, gosh, they can lay a lot of eggs out there.
Yes, they can.
Yeah, I think upwards of 500 per female. So you can see where the numbers would add up really quickly. And Paige, I would agree, overall we saw lower numbers, but there were still hot spots that were heavy feeding took place. Obviously not a pest we can ignore. They always call it the $1 billion pest. So it can take $1 billion right off the top. And especially, in today's economics where, we've got to protect every bushel with the commodity prices, we certainly don't want to take any chances with rootworm.
No.
So getting into a little bit of the data, this is some of the work done across our tech development group, and this would be covering several states. But looking at node injury scores, and you always start over here on the left with the double pro, gives you an idea how much pressure we're dealing with, and this is 1.22, so about 1.25 nodes chewed off. So I wouldn't say extremely heavy pressure, but moderate pressure. And then the stair step down with double pro and soil applied insecticide, which this year, especially a drier year, I think did a pretty decent job. And you compare to Duracade and Chrome, which typically look like this. They're better than the untreated, but still show quite a bit of feeding. Smart Stacks then statistically being better than the Chrome and Duracade, and then of course Smart Stacks Pro coming in at a whole nother level of protection. And the Iowa State data really mirrors our internal data as far as node injury scores with Smart Stacks Pro, Smart Stacks both doing very well. And the general threshold or the economic threshold is considered 0.5 or half a node on an NIS score. And that's a key point because Smart Stacks generally will come in below that threshold, especially on this Iowa State data set, where Chrome comes in above the threshold. So big difference, even though numerically not huge, but when you're talking that threshold level, that starts to separate these traits out.
We do have a summary right here from 2021 and 2022. So these are head-to-head comparisons across 69 locations, where that pressure in 2021 and 22 is combined. So SmartStax Pro with RNAi technology is what we have out here, and it is showing 3 times better control than Chrome. But as you look down here, as far as what things look like in different types of pressure, so that medium to high corn rootworm pressure, SmartStax Pro is coming in at 92% as far as consistency. Very high, 81%. As you move down, SmartStax technology still having some really good protection there at 71% with that medium to high corn rootworm pressure. Then onto the Chrome products, it drops down pretty significantly as far as 46% in that medium to high pressure. And we definitely did see that in some of these fields out there.
Yeah, great point, Paige. And the consistency would be defined as 0.5 node injury score or less. So again, back to that threshold that we really look at as far as separating these products out.
We had 107.33, 111.33 out in fields, growers' fields this past year. So we got a really good look at it. We spent a lot of time out there ground truthing and seeing how things looked. And there was varying degrees of corn rootworm pressure that these SmartStax Pro hybrids were placed on. So this is in Carroll County. This photo was taken July 14th. There was a wind event prior to that. So what I did with this particular field, I did look at the node injury score. So the SmartStax Pro came in with a 0, and then the Chrome product, the P0622 Chrome, came in with a node injury score of 1.2. So if you look really close to that Chrome picture, you can see a little bit of the kink down there at those the bottom part of the plant. So this was split planted in the field. So when we did get that wind, you could see the differences there as far as standability. There was some lodging with the Chrome. When it came to harvest time frame, SmartStax Pro had a 15 bushel advantage and definitely easeability as far as going through that field at harvest time frame with the SmartStax Pro Chrome. It was a little tough to get through that.
Yeah, great example, especially when it comes to the bottom line as far as yield in the field. Yeah, really, to summarize, 3 times better protection and 100%. There's not too many things that are 100%, but boy, you'd be able to have that consistency to have 100% advantage over Chrome. And frankly, a lot of it is because of the less expression, roughly 2/3 less expression in the Chrome as far as the BT protein for rootworm versus the AMXT. So that's where that better protection is coming from with SmartStax or SmartStax Pro. Craig, you had some great protocols out at your farm and then also across the state of Iowa. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let you talk a little bit about those.
All right. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, so the protocols that we did this year in tech development are numbered as 3904, where we were evaluating SmartStax and SmartStax Pro versus the competition in specifics, and the 3905 protocol, which is our new trait technology package we're looking at called VT4 Pro. And I had 3 locations of these 2 protocols. They were paired together at these 3 locations. Typical planting date for me was middle of May. So I had a May 13th planting date and a May 14th planting date for these 3 sites. And as far as pressure goes, it can be a crapshoot every year for how much rootworm pressure you have. One of my locations for sure has hot pressure based on the sticky trap photo we looked at earlier, and that is a corn on corn. The other corn on corn site is a multi-year corn on corn, but the pressure just isn't quite as severe. And the other one was a rotated acre, and it has rootworm pressure, but again, just not quite as severe. So was kind of hoping that I would get that pressure, but I still got yield data points out of those. And that's important too, to evaluate the yield performance of the trait packages in the absence of pressure, in my opinion. So if we go ahead to the next slide, Jim, just have a quick summary. Again, the green bars on the left are the 3904 protocol for my locations that I had, and that does include the high pressure and the 2 low pressure locations. And then the VT4 Pro trial on the right, the 3905 protocol, again, at the same locations. And these are the average of the yields, along with the average of the dollars per acre based on $6.60 and almost 6 cents a point for drying. So you can see, looking at the trait packages on the green bars, Pioneer 947 Chrome, and then you got Duracade, Northrop King 1239 5122, and then VT Double Pro DKC 6270, and then VT Double Pro with insecticide, soil applied insecticide, again 6270, and then Smart Stacks DKC 6269, and then Smart Stacks Pro, which is 11133. We had a nice stair step yield all the way up to Smart Stacks. I was hoping for the Smart Stacks Pro to just take it one step further, but I did have a tiny bit of green snap that I think took the top end off of the Smart Stacks Pro. And again, I got that wind event in early July that busted a few tops out of that hybrid. It was just at the right time. And it was actually at about all 3 locations. So again, that does happen, but a nice stair step performance. If you look at the VT4 Pro set, you can see we're bouncing around just a little bit more. But if you do look closely, the Chrome hybrid and the Duracade hybrid, which are on the far left there in the blue bars, those are the 2 lowest yielding hybrids in the trial on average. So again, we've got great performance with our products, and the VT4 Pro showed up fairly well. And one thing I do want to note there is that you do have a Smart Stacks hybrid 5834, and you do have a Smart Stacks Pro 10733, which again, I consider 10733 pretty solid performer in Northwest Iowa. And the 5834, the reason that genetics was used in this trial was that was our isoline hybrid that we had converted to VT4 Pro. So that, if you're wondering the reason why we used 5834 and 35, the VT4 Pro is actually 5834 family genetics. So again, it was kind of an isoline comparison. One interesting note, in Jim and Paige, we kind of discussed this earlier in our data reviews that we've had, was noticing how a Poncho 1250 seed treatment kind of floated to the top in yield performance. And we kind of evaluated that, and then that actually shows up in some national data as well, where it did fairly well this year. I don't always count on Poncho 1250 providing that much rootworm protection, but I think with later planting dates this year and drier weather, that Poncho 1250 was able to express itself and actually do a okay job of holding back some of the rootworm feeding, and therefore allowing those hybrids to yield a little bit better. So again, you can see 5835 with Poncho 1250 was pretty solid at 211, and VT4 Pro with 1250 was also really solid at 216. So again, very interesting, and that did show up in some national data cuts as well.
And Craig, remind us on the VT4 Pro, what all goes into that trait?
Yes, thanks, Jim, for that reminder. So VT4 Pro is essentially above ground Tricepta, if you will, along with Yield Guard rootworm Cry3BB1 with RNAi technology. So it is a 2 mode of action for corn rootworm and a multi-mode of action for above ground. There is Roundup Ready technology in the package, but there is no Liberty Link. And again, so we're kind of similar to Double Pro as far as how we do weed control programs. And again, outstanding above ground protection for all the Lepidopteran species. And we're kind of targeting, or we're looking at targeting VT4 Pro as a direct competitor, in my opinion, for the Chrome technology. Again, it's not a bulletproof rootworm package, but with RNAi being novel and brand new, it really adds some synergistic effects even to the Cry3BB1, in my opinion, and has done some pretty amazing things, and also allows us to bring germplasm to the marketplace just a little bit quicker than bringing out stacked hybrids like Smart Stacks and Smart Stacks Pro, because we're just evaluating with the Roundup Ready technology package and the Tricepta package, and not the Herculex package. So again, gives us a little bit of advantage there, maybe on some germplasm releases. And maybe allowing us to have a tool in the toolbox to combat some of the lower pressure areas, some rotated acre areas where folks want some rootworm protection, but they don't need the full-blown package of Smart Stacks or Smart Stacks Pro.
I'm really happy that you explained that piece as far as, you know, the different types of pressure that will fit in. Gosh, I am finding, you know, first year corn to have some corn rootworm pressure out there. So this will be good.
Yes, and you know, in the RNAi technology that's in VT4 Pro and Smart Stacks Pro, it is a very deadly or lethal technology for the rootworm. It's novel. It's never been shown before until we've released this technology, and it's got a very high mortality rate on the rootworm larvae. Does take longer to kill than the cry proteins or the other proteins that are in these packages, but it's much more lethal. So again, it's an interesting concept. It's not fully approved yet, but we're looking at hopefully a 2024 launch, if you will, and further testing for 23.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great points. Well said. Yeah, it's exciting to have that as another trait option going forward. And 2024 is not that far off.
No, it's not. So these next couple slides are actually include my data sets that I just showed you for my 3 locations, but this is Iowa data. So these are sets, graphs that Edwin Benkert put together from the Atlantic Research Farm, and there's 16 locations here, and these have different kinds of levels of rootworm pressure, and again, it pretty much lines up with performance in the 3904 protocol, where Smart Stacks Pro is our lead yield candidate. Double Pro with insecticide did very well, very similar to Smart Stacks. And then you go right down the line. The VT Double Pro by itself did pretty decent for no protection, and absolutely better than Duracade and Chrome, which in my opinion, under pressure is pretty surprising. I'd like to give them the benefit of the doubt that they perform a little bit under pressure, but the Double Pro hybrids that we used were pretty solid performers this year.
Yeah, in a case like this, when we're looking at yield, you know, it's not only the trait comparison, but genetic comparison too. So that has a big play in the difference we're seeing in yield.
Absolutely. Looking at the next slide, again, is the nodal injury score. And this is based on, out of those 16 locations across Iowa, 10 of them had some pretty decent injury or pressure. And we were able to score those roots in those trials. And again, this is pretty much kind of the similar type of response that we showed from the national data that Jim talked about earlier. The VT Double Pro, the most susceptible to 1.7, and on down the line where you got Chrome and Duracade, just a little over 1 node gone, and Smart Stacks at a 0.8, and Double Pro with insecticide right there at a 0.7. So again, very similar between those 2 packages. And then Smart Stacks Pro coming in really strong at a 1/4 node gone. And again, that 0.5, as Jim mentioned before, is that threshold, if you will, for economic damage on for rootworm protection.
Mm-hmm.
Going into that next slide, this is basically looking at the last 2 years of data, so 2021 and 2022. So those same locations, there's a total of 32 now. And again, it pretty much stair steps the same way for yield performance. Smart Stacks Pro right up there at the top, Double Pro with insecticide doing very well. Double Pro by itself hanging right in there with the Chrome and the Duracade packages. And again, germplasm there, in my opinion, makes a big difference on how those Double Pro hybrids respond and how they do even under pressure.
Yep, you bet. No, that's a lot of locations, 32 locations over 2 years. So a lot of data points go into this bar graph.
Yes, absolutely. And looking at the 3905 results, so this would be just 2022 data. Again, 16 locations, because these 2 protocols were paired together within tech development. But again, Smart Stacks Pro at the top for performance. The VT4 Pro with Poncho 1250, like I mentioned earlier, reflects my data, doing very well across these 16 locations. One thing I will say is that the Chrome hybrid that we used in here was 0622. And I consider that some pretty good genetics for Northwest Iowa. And it actually did better in the 3905 protocol than the other hybrid that was in 3904, which was 109 day that I don't think is planted much in Northwest Iowa. So I think there's a germplasm thing going on there specifically. But Smart Stacks and the Chrome hybrid were very similar. VT4 Pro, a soil applied insecticide, was just a notch lower, but doing very well. VT4 Pro by itself, just right there again. There's no statistics on these, but those are probably all pretty similar in yield potential overall. And again, Double Pro with nothing on it, and Duracade were towards the bottom of the list.
Mhm.
Looking at the nodal injury scores, 9 out of the 16 locations had pressure that we scored these trials. And again, it looks very similar to the 3904 protocol, where the Double Pro hybrids did almost score 2 nodes gone for rootworm fading. The Double Pro with 1250, again, doesn't provide a lot of rootworm protection for feeding, but this year allowed it to do some pretty darn good yield expression, and those genetics were able to pull through and yield. But again, the RIT score wasn't super good in these protocols at these 9 out of 16 locations. Similar to Duracade, Chrome was a little bit better, but VT4 was a little bit better than Chrome. Smart Stacks was right there along with VT4. VT Double Pro with insecticide was just another step again, and VT4 Pro with 1250 was even a little bit better. So again, just very interesting to see the dynamics here. And Smart Stacks Pro again being the leader for the least amount of root feeding on those roots.
It's really neat to see that consistency, with all of these trials going on, and the Iowa State one that Jim showed earlier. I mean, that's great to see.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to be able to look at different sources, different data cuts, even within our own organization, and you just still see the same trends.
Yeah.
And it's a really strong story for us to be talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of great data, Craig. Just want to sum it up with this slide and several of the bullet points.
Yeah, so overall, looking at all of the Iowa data that we just talked about, Smart Stacks Pro was clearly, the yield leader and the best rootworm protection out of all these locations and trials, even over 2021 and 2022 data. The VT4 Pro hybrids had comparable yield to Smart Stacks, especially under no pressure. And I think that builds confidence that the deployed hybrids will be comparable to the current germplasm. So again, we evaluated the 58, 34, 35 family because that's where we had the isolines built for VT4. Smart Stacks Pro, again, lowest nodal injury score. And then the Smart Stacks had lower nodal injury scores than the competition as far as compared to Chrome and Duracade. And even VT4 Pro had lower nodal injury scores when averaged across all locations, not necessarily at the high pressure ones, but when you averaged them all, VT4 Pro was very competitive with Chrome and Duracade, if not outdoing them. At the lower lower nodal injury score places, the nodal injury score was higher than Smart Stack. So again, Smart Stack still providing some great protection under a little bit more intense pressure. And then the addition of soil applied insecticide and Poncho 1250 was helping with some of those nodal injury scores. Again, that's not what I would count on all the time every year, especially for Poncho 1250. But the soil applied insecticides have performed fairly well, especially these last 2 years with a little bit drier conditions. The actual active ingredients aren't leaching out of the soil profile where the roots are. Obviously, further testing is needed to be performed for VT4 Pro. And I am really looking forward to having some newer germplasm and some newer genetics to be looking at going forward. And we are going to be having some for 2023. So again, I'm really looking forward to that and how they play out. But I still hang my hat on Smart Stacks and Smart Stacks Pro for overall rootworm protection, knowing the performance that they have. And obviously, we still want to do the best management practices, practice the right rotations, plant a non-host crop when it's deemed necessary. Those greater than expected locations for pressure, we need to be focused on protecting the traits and protecting our corn crop by maybe going to something like a non-host crop of soybeans or alfalfa or something different.
Good point.
Yep. Excellent points, Craig. Oh, thanks for summarizing that up. It's real exciting to see that data. So to finish up, just how about 2023? A lot of good stuff coming out of the last 2 years, and try to predict what pressure is going to look like for next year, which is always a challenge because obviously weather can impact that, and even what levels of stress we have for next year when we're starting to get our rootworm hatch. But this is the data using the beetle monitoring project that we had. So basically the sticky traps that you saw earlier from Craig's field, we had 562 fields represented. And of course you see Iowa is well covered, and then northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, southern Minnesota, a little bit out in Nebraska. So the bulk of those fields are in Iowa. Obviously we don't get everything covered, but we take those sticky trap data sets, average it together, and try to make predictions. So essentially for 2023, you still have a lot of areas in the red, especially in the northwest corner of Iowa. Actually, like O'Brien County has some green, which should technically be below the threshold. But then you get into north central Iowa again, Kossuth County, Emmett, Palo Alto, you got a lot of red again. So right now, the prediction is fairly high pressure because even with some of the low larval pressure that Paige talked about, we ended up with a heck of a lot of beetles out there. And this would be just showing side by side coming out of 21, what was predicted for 2022. Fairly similar, maybe a little bit more red clear up in the overall corner of the state, and then some areas of lighter pressure as compared to what we're looking at for 2023. Southern Minnesota, just by the way, is predicting to be a lot hotter going forward to 2023 on the rootworm pressure. And lastly, just looking at some of the actual information. So in the corn on corn fields, or in general, just taking corn on corn, corn on beans, 38% of the fields coming out of 2021 were above the economic threshold, where this year, taking that 2022 data for predicting 2023, it actually jumped up to 53%. Continuous corn alone, for looking at just those fields, it went from 52% up to 74%. And if we're in the rotated fields, first year corn went from 17% up to 10%. So a little bit less in the rotated fields, but we do have to remember, at least in a lot of the areas in northwest Iowa, 2021 was a pretty heavy year for extended diapause. A lot of people would say it was the heaviest year that they've seen maybe in the last 10 to 15. So we're going back on a lot of those fields in 2023. So that's the caution. I think this number might look low, but we've got a lot of potential for that extended diapause northern beetle laying those eggs 2 years ago to cause a problem for us this year. So we've got great options with Smart Stacks and Smart Stacks Pro that we do need to be using, especially to protect that yield, both in the rotated as well as the corn on corn acre. Well, yeah, Craig, Paige, that's where we wanted to wrap up. I guess before we get to the Thanksgiving leftover question, any last thoughts, anything else to throw in?
I think this was a lot of great information to share and to get a good game plan for next year. Yeah,
and one thing, Jim, that I keep thinking about in the back of my head is just the overall weather patterns. And right now we're sitting bare ground, not a lot of moisture in the soil profile. What kind of mortality rates are we going to end up with for CRW for 2023? And if we have low mortality rates, I think we're set up for some pretty intense pressure for 2023.
Great.
Yeah, great point. And if we're dry, yeah, like you say, the root regeneration is slow, so it doesn't take a high level of larval feeding to cause problems.
Yep.
Well, excellent. Yeah, great information. Thank you too for being on. Paige, ladies first, we'll start with you. What's your favorite way to use those turkey leftovers?
So I'm not a huge fan of using them. I have been known to use the turkey as far as for turkey enchiladas, but something that I like to do, I like to sneak a piece or two of French silk pie, hide it, and eat it when nobody's around. So I'm more of a sweet tooth.
I guess technically that fits into the leftover category.
Yeah,
that's good. Craig, how about you?
Yeah, so for me, the inevitable consumption of the turkey for me is usually in a sandwich with Miracle Whip and cold, not a warm sandwich, just a cold turkey sandwich with Miracle Whip. And then I do like to have the leftovers as far as mashed potatoes, gravy, stuffing. That will get eaten with that cold sandwich, but that'll get heated up. So that's how I like to gobble those down. No pun intended.
Interesting.
What about you, Jim?
Well, for me, I like to grind it up and put it on ice cream. I like ice cream enough. No, actually, I similar to Craig. Boy, a Hawaiian bun. Slice it. I like mayonnaise. So mayonnaise with turkey. I like it heated up personally. So we differ there. Sorry, but yeah, turkey sandwiches and a Hawaiian bun. I'll eat those for days.
Interesting.
Awesome.
That's great.
Yeah. Well, all right. It's good having you guys on. Always fun. We've got a good team here in Northwest Iowa, and always good to share some information. So hopefully you found it useful. And thanks, Paige and Craig.
Yep. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Paige.
Thank you.